Hey everyone, welcome back to Todos Santos. Today we're going to be moving south of the island that we made last episode and building an industrial rum distillery, inspired, of course, by the Bacardi distillery in Cataño. Let's go. I realized pretty quickly that this build was going to require a wide variety of assets, so I looked at the inspiration and made a list of approximately all the different types of buildings that I needed and downloaded them all from the Steam Workshop, loaded up the game, and made this row of all the assets that I thought we might be using. Of course, not all of these are going to make the cut, but I think most of them are going to serve us well. This could be kind of a challenging way to start a build, I think, because you're not really sure what the context of each individual piece of the puzzle is going to be. But one thing I noticed is that it really allowed me to give each thing the proper amount of space to breathe. Like, for example, if I were to just put down one of these buildings, detail it, put down the next building over, detail that, it might end up being either way too cramped or way too spread out. And I wanted to give this thing the proper footprint, basically taking up this whole tip of the peninsula next to the island. So I think doing it this way from this overhead view really helped me get a sense of scale, because this thing ends up being pretty big and a pretty important part of the visual character of the city, looking down at it from satellite view, like we're doing right now. I don't know too much about how these kind of industrial distilleries work. I get the basic process of making spirits, but I don't really understand what all these different parts do, so I tried to just more or less replicate what I could see on Google Maps. And I couldn't find much information tying the different parts of the distillation process to these various things that you see in the distillery itself. So I tried to give each part that I was putting down a little bit of a story, or at least a part in the process of making rum. And we're going to get to that as we go in and detail each area. I'll explain what my thought process was there and why all these things went where they did. So we're beginning with what's called the Cathedral of Rum, which is inspired by a real Art Deco building in the real-life distillery. So while this originally would have been the entirety of the distillery when it was initially established here, and whatever events transpired in the history of Todos Santos as opposed to the history of Puerto Rico, it's now largely just there for historical value and for the the tourists who come and visit the distillery, which is another whole aspect of this campus that we're going to get into quite a bit later on. I couldn't find a building that was perfectly like this one, but I did find this really nice streamlined school asset, which we've actually used before over in the Old Town. I just think it's a very nicely modeled asset, and of course it is also Art Deco, I believe, so it has some similar features and a similar silhouette. So I just needed to change it just a little bit with PO, dragging this tower way up so we get that kind of cathedral look. And then I also wanted to add in these sloped roofs on top, so I'm just using a clock tower to do that. Again, getting rid of some of the features we don't need in PO. And making the whole thing bright white so that it just kind of fits the Todos Santos aesthetic. Now, I ended up branding this place La Gloria instead of Bacardi, one, because there are no Bacardi props on the workshop. There is a Bacardi delivery truck, which I have driving around the city, but that's not enough to actually make a distillery out of. But we do have these nice La Gloria props, which I believe is actually a shoe store in Puerto Rico, so I'm sure that's probably funny if you're familiar with that store at all, but I thought it was a nice name for this kind of thing, and it has kind of that grand feeling that you get when you look at that building in particular. The functionality of this place is going to be pretty straightforward. We have an office block and commercial block to represent the administration and the tourism side of things, and then I'm also going to turn this into the central building for a farm industry area so that we can start processing some crops here, and that's going to represent our rum production. Also, my camera started spinning around randomly here. I don't know why that happened. So the first step in our industrial rum distillation is going to be actually fermenting molasses into, I don't know exactly what it's called, but whatever is the precursor to the distilled rum. So they would put molasses into these tanks with some yeast and let it ferment away for a while. I don't know exactly why I ended up having this be an open air shed, but I think it looks kind of cool. It's a really nice asset with a nice texture on the roof that really stands out when looking at it from above. I'm going to use these farming storage blocks to store crops, of course, and we could imagine that that's basically representing lots of molasses being delivered here and having it sit there for a while. So once that's all fermented and we have our probably really terrible tasting alcoholic juice, we're going to pump that over into these, I'm using oil refineries, but it's meant to be, I don't know exactly what it's called, distillation towers or stills, I guess. But we have a couple of those. One of them is attached directly to the Cathedral of Rum, and another one is attached to a warehouse that we're going to get to detailing in just a minute. I also clipped some of these crop processing blocks into there to stand in for our rum being distilled. Next, we have these large holding tanks, and these don't really serve any particular purpose other than allowing them to expand the amount of rum that they're able to produce. So once it's done being distilled, it would be pumped into there, and then it could be left there for a while before it gets sent on to the next stage. I wanted to have a couple areas of this to show that there's been some expansion over time. So we have these more modern ones here that have a nice blue coat going with our blue color scheme that we're going for their branding. And then we have these older ones here. I found a free like copper-ish texture online, and am using PO to just completely replace the texture on these tanks, which actually seems to be really terrible for performance, even with a fairly low resolution texture. Every time I look at these, my FPSs start dropping. Luckily, you can't notice that with the sped up time lapse. Anyway, we have those older tanks here and the newer ones. And once the rum is ready to go on to the next portion, it would be pumped into this warehouse. And this would be the aging or barrel house, I guess you would call it. So they would have rum pumped into here and stored in probably oak barrels, I suppose, and aged for, however long you're going to age your rum. To make this area functional, we have a couple of office and industrial blocks. And then because there's going to be rum sitting in here for possibly years at a time, I'm also going to put down a warehouse storing flour, which of course is standing in for our processed crops, aka our rum. Next door to this, we have all those tanks. We're not going to get to detailing those quite yet, but those would basically be more holding tanks. But this time, instead of just for the pure unfinished but distilled rum, it's for the completed rum that's been aged. Now over here, we have this big warehouse, which is the location where the rum's going to get bottled or kegged, or I don't know what they actually do to ship these things out, but there will be basically a bottling plant in here. And of course, a whole bunch of loading docks so that you could have your trucks come in and take those deliveries. Attached to it on the right is a really nice and modern looking office building, and that would be basically the labs. So this is where they would do different experiments and tastings, quality control, that kind of stuff. And of course, we have some more warehouse blocks in there. Some of them are also storing processed crops, and some of them are storing glass to stand in for bottles, of course. I also found a set of industry blocks that are much like these, except that they function as the unique factories that come with the industry's DLC. So I grabbed one of those that was a lemonade factory, which processes, I believe, crops and glass into commercial goods. So I'm going to come back off screen and add one of those in there as well, just to kind of get a little bit of immersion and have a reason for importing all that glass and processing all these crops. It doesn't end up being exactly the most successful industrial area, but we do generate quite a bit of traffic. We get quite a few jobs here as well, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now, Bacardi is actually a pretty huge company. They do more than just distill rum. I think they make like soft drinks and other alcoholic beverages as well. So we have some generic kind of factories and warehouses at the fringes of the campus just to stand in for that. Again, I'm not exactly sure what they do beyond making rum at the Cataño Distillery. So I'm just using my imagination here and pretending that they're making, soda or whatever. Before I was talking about how the various stages of rum production are being pumped in between these different areas of the distillery, and of course we need a way to actually do that. So we have these lovely industrial pipe networks that I'm just dragging around between the various stages. I thought it was starting to look a little bit too crowded or bulky with all these giant pipes running everywhere, so I decided to also use some of these smaller ones. We have those connecting these tanks so that we actually have a way for them to interface with each other. And then there are also some ways to transfer in between the various facilities with these as well. Where they need to cross the road, they just go up and over, which I think looks kind of cool and is a pretty neat feature of this asset that you can raise them up like that. I suppose you could also have them like sunken underground or have the whole pipe network sunken underground, but that doesn't look as cool, and it's probably harder to perform maintenance and repairs as well. So we're going to have this nice network of pipes above ground. We also have an administration area. Obviously, it's a high school, but I kind of liked the building. I liked the little awning that sticks out, so we're going to make our own custom sign for that. And then we're going to detail it up to look like it fits its role as the headquarters of this facility. So before I mentioned that we're going to integrate some tourism into this place. Now the Bacardi Distillery in Cataño is a fairly popular tourist destination from what I understand. So we're going to take inspiration from this little pavilion and building here, which I think are used for welcoming visitors potentially. So I'm using this public library asset from Hong Kong, which I think has a really unique shape. I couldn't find anything quite like the inspiration. So I just wanted to find something that stood out and looked different from pretty much anything else in the city. We're going to turn it white to fit our color scheme here, just using color rectangles in PO. And same thing with this building here. So if the pavilion was maybe like a cafe or a bar that you could visit on site, this would be the visitor's entrance where you could go in and get prepared for your tour. And this is the Aquarium of Roads. Both these very nice assets are going to be linked down in the description. Of course, we also need a big parking area for all our tourists to park in. There's not really any bus line that goes too close to this area. I also went looking for some string lights and was very happy to see these by City Walk, City Wall. They light up at night. You'll be able to see them in action in the cinematics. But I thought it would be kind of cool to have those hanging over this little restaurant or cafe patio. And then we also have them lighting up the main path from the visitor's entrance over here to the cafe. So I imagine you would probably enter through there, walk down this little path following the lights, and then you'd probably get your, complimentary drink or whatever before your tour starts. Now, I thought it would be kind of cool to have a kind of pleasant-looking access road for our visitors. So there's this nice tree-lined road that goes into our one-way system that runs through the whole park and into our parking lot as well, of course. I also decided to reroute our highways here. I just thought, because we're going to be making a town south of the distillery next episode, I thought it would be more sensible to have the main highway run through that as opposed to running up to the island and terminating there. So instead of that, we're going to have a four-way intersection here with the main highway continuing to run along the shoreline. Now, I did make another outside connection here, and way too much traffic started spawning on it for this little two-lane highway. So I decided instead to connect it up to our ugly suburbs off at the edge of the map. And that way we get a trickle of cars coming and going, but it's not overloaded like it was there. Now we need to detail up this entrance road that I was talking about before. I decided to go for a kind of a funky little roundabout that basically is just there to slow people down as they arrive at the parking lot, but it does look kind of ugly just with these plain roads here, so we need to come in with IMT, do a little bit of detailing there. Doing this a very inefficient way by changing the offsets of these curb networks instead of selecting intersecting points, which is something, it might not make sense if you're not familiar with IMT, but it's something I didn't know that the mod could do, and it's just an easier way to get these little islands that only stick out partway into the road. But again, that's something we're going to get more into later in the series. But for now, we're moving on to the main secured entrance off of the main highway. I wanted to spruce up this security gate entrance with a Spanish colonial looking building, and then we're just going to run our road off of the highway, add a little slip lane here, and run that underneath that. Of course, it's a PO, and we need a little bit of extra space, so we can just grab those vertices on the end and drag it over so it spans the whole road. Now, the exit road, I felt like you wouldn't really need as much security there, so it just kind of runs around the security gate. And then you can't actually turn left off of there onto the highway, since it's a divided highway. So you just turn right, and then you'll have to pull a U-turn at some point if you want to get back to Todos Santos. found this really cool sign on the workshop. It says La Gloria. It's not related to or at least I don't believe it's related to the brand that I'm using to stand in for Bacardi, but it happens to be the exact same name, so we're going to use that for our entrance. And it just kind of has this, not quite imposing, but just this almost monumental look. So I wanted to make that easily visible from the roadside, of course. So you have this little tangram construction in front of it, and some lights going on it. And then to go with our blue color scheme for the brand, we have some blue lights backlighting it. And now we're going to take this fencing and run it from one side of the security gate all the way around the facility and end up at the other side of the security gate so that we have a nice secured area. For some reason, I thought it would be cool to have this concrete river on the far side of the distillery, so I'm just going to custom make that with a road down on the ground, some retaining walls with grass here to bridge the gap. To make it look like there are a bunch of plants and algae growing in here, I'm taking these grass props, copying and pasting them on either side so we get kind of a random pattern, and then some kind of nastier looking grass right down at the bottom. Some water props on top because I don't think we're actually going to get water all the way down here, and it's just really hard to control the water in this game, especially in a channel this small. And then we're just going to take this segment, copy and paste it all the way over here to the shoreline, and there's going to be an outlet between the beach and the rocks, which I think looks a bit more natural than just having this abrupt transition from rocks to sand. While I was doing all this aesthetic stuff, we started getting some traffic problems with all these trucks trying to make deliveries to fill up all the warehouses that we'd plopped. So I made an intersection that ended up being really ugly and not very functional. So we're just going to delete that and do a little bit of highway work to connect this area up to the freeway so that the trucks making deliveries here can get here a little bit more easily. So my thought process with the way these roads are laid out is that they were originally agricultural roads that were just pretty much rural 2-lane roads. But as this area has been developed and turned into an industrial area that's going to have a little town alongside it, they've been widening these roads into main avenues or divided highways. So here you can see basically they have turned this 2-lane highway into one half of a divided highway, but that's really just something they do directly in the areas that are being developed. So the remaining portion of that highway there is still 2 lanes, even though it does connect this, what is eventually going to be a town here up with the freeway. But we're going to get more into that sort of stuff over the next few episodes as we do some agricultural builds. Of course, we also need some slip lanes in this intersection. It actually turns into kind of a major intersection between these 2 thoroughfares. So I just wanted to make sure all our lane connections and everything was set up properly. Ends up looking kind of cool, actually. Technically, this is 4 intersections in one. I probably should set up a timed traffic light or something to make sure that runs properly. But when you have nodes this close together that all have traffic lights, they don't seem to be able to spawn the visual portion of the traffic light for some reason. So I just plopped down some props, and I think that's probably good enough. I did do a little bit of detailing, like these red paths connecting the various parts of the crosswalk, some lane lines and arrows and stuff and signs, and of course a few trees just to beautify it up a little bit. But really what I wanted to do was to get back to the distillery so we could do some finishing touches on that. Of course, to get all our tourists around here on their tour, we need to have some sort of bus or cart or whatever. I actually scoured the workshop looking for something that looked a little bit more substantial than just a golf cart, but I honestly couldn't find anything, at least that was available as a bus. So I'm just using our typical golf cart that we also used back in the film studio build in episode 50. I'm just stopping at all the major steps that I talked about earlier as we were building it. And I'm also using a bus depot that happened to match the office we used just about perfectly, so I clipped that bus depot right next to that office just a second ago. Another feature of the Bacardi distillery is that they have a few wind turbines nearby. I presume it's generating some of their electricity at least. So I wanted to do that here using this unique version off the workshop that looks just a little bit different than the vanilla one. So I wanted to have something that stood out a little bit more. And obviously they would need to perform maintenance on these, so we have some nice little paths where I guess you could drive your maintenance truck up there and take care of them. Now, I mentioned this a few times before in the series, but these grass buildings are definitely a problem when it comes to hitting the building limit, which we're going to actually hit next episode. We'll get more into that then, of course. But these wide open areas of grass just don't look particularly good, in my opinion. No matter what your map theme is or if you have grass sprites on or off, they just don't look very detailed. So I like to use these when possible. And then just to show that they don't really care too much about keeping it perfectly trimmed, There are some areas of wilder grass with some trees growing up as well, with the usual set of tree assets plus these acai palms that I've just been going absolutely crazy with recently because they look so good. To signal that the Cathedral of Rum here is kind of the heart of the history of this distillery, we have a few artifacts from the history of sugarcane production and rum production on the island. So we have this locomotive here that maybe it's not super realistic to what would have been run on rail lines serving sugarcane farms, but it's meant to represent something like that would have run on these industrial railways that aren't in use anymore, and in Todos Santos at least have been repurposed for commuter rail. So we have one of those there with a nice little garden around it. And you might have seen me putting down some rows of corn props because it's the closest thing I could find on the workshop to sugarcane. So they have, even though they don't grow much sugarcane anymore in Todos Santos, they have some for decorative use planted here around the cathedral. I also thought the practical side of things was looking a little bit bare and not quite industrial enough. So we have some various silos and stuff. I don't really have a story for what purpose these serve in the distillation process or in the production process, but we're adding a few of those here and there among some other things, just to spruce it up and add some variation to the surfaces here. Now at this point, I thought I was done with the build, and I even started recording the cinematics for it, but I realized that I was missing something very important, which was some visual indication that there are... and of course figure out a way to not quite fix that problem, but at least postpone it. Bye-bye.